I still remember the sound of the rain that night. It wasn't even heavy, just a soft, steady tapping against the windows, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to do something awful, and I did. I packed my duffel bag with shaking hands, heart pounding like I was running from something, though I was only walking out the door of the small apartment we shared, her voice trailing behind me, soft and broken. "Please don't do this, Nick, please." But I did. I left. I walked down the stairs like a coward, like a man who couldn't handle the weight of a decision he should have made with love instead of fear, and all I remember after that was the slam of the door behind me and the way my chest felt like it was caving in as I stepped out into the cold. I didn't look back, not once, and I've lived with that shame for every day since. She was pregnant, just 8 weeks in when she told me, her eyes full of a strange mix of hope and fear, as if she already knew I might not be the man she thought I was, and the truth is, I wasn't ready, not for a child, not for forever, not for any of it. I told myself I needed space to think, that I couldn't breathe under the pressure of what our life was becoming, but in reality, I was just scared. Scared of failing, scared of being like my own father, who left when I was 6 and never once looked back. I thought I was different, that I had a heart, that I wouldn't abandon the people who loved me, but when push came to shove, I ran. I rented a room in a crummy motel on the edge of town and spent the first week drinking cheap beer and trying to convince myself I'd made the right choice, but her silence ate at me, the way she didn't call or text or come looking, like she was already learning to live without me, and that only made me more determined not to go back. Years passed like smoke, slow and hazy, and I filled the silence with meaningless jobs, half-hearted flings, and late-night regrets. I told myself I'd circle back one day, when I was better, when I had something to offer, but I never got there. I just got older, more tired, more haunted by the face I couldn't forget, the sound of her laugh, the way she used to hold my hand in bed like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. It wasn't until my mother passed away last fall that I really let it hit me. She'd kept in touch with Alyssa after I left. Of course she had. My mom always loved her, maybe more than she ever loved me, and when I was packing up her things, I found a stack of letters tucked away in the back of her dresser, all in Alyssa's handwriting, neat and careful, just like she always was. There were photos too. Little snapshots of a life I'd never seen, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and one that made my breath catch in my throat, a little boy with dark curly hair and Alyssa's eyes, sitting on a swing, laughing like the world had never hurt him. That's when it hit me, really hit me, not just the regret, but the loss. I had a son, a real living, breathing child out there who had no idea who I was, and I wasn't some tragic hero in a story. I was just a ghost who had chosen to disappear, and for what? To save myself from a future that terrified me. And in doing so I became exactly what I feared most. For weeks I carried that photo around like a secret, staring at it when I thought no one was watching, memorizing every detail of his face, wondering if he liked dinosaurs or trains, if he was shy like I'd been or fearless like she used to be, and one night, I just snapped. I threw my phone across the room and sat down on the edge of my bed and cried like a man who'd finally run out of excuses, and then I got in the car and started driving, back to the city I'd fled like a thief, back to the life I left behind like it was trash. I didn't even have a plan, just an address on an envelope from one of the letters. I parked across the street and stared at the house, a small, cozy place with a red door and flower pots on the porch. It looked like a home, one that had grown without me, and for the first time in a decade, I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the weight of everything I'd done was pressing down on my chest. I sat there for hours, just watching, heart pounding like I was a criminal stalking a scene I wasn't supposed to witness, and then the door opened, and she stepped out, Alyssa, and I swear, time just stopped. She looked older, sure, a little tired around the eyes, but still so beautiful it made my stomach twist. She was holding the hand of a boy, probably around 9 or 10, and my throat closed up because I knew, without a doubt, that he was mine. And then another man came out, tall, broad shoulders, clean-cut, the kind of guy you expect to see in family commercials. He kissed Alyssa on the cheek and ruffled the boy's hair, and I felt something dark curl in my gut, something sharp and jealous and ugly, because that was supposed to be me, that was supposed to be my family. It wasn't. I had given that up the moment I walked away, and now I was nothing more than a shadow on the sidewalk, a stranger with too many regrets and no right to ask for anything, and yet, I couldn't leave. I needed to talk to her, to explain, to at least say I was sorry, even if it didn't change a damn thing. So I waited until the boy was inside, and the men drove off, and then I crossed the street with my heart in my throat, and when she turned and saw me, her eyes went wide, not with joy or anger, just shock, pure and raw, and for a moment neither of us said anything, just stood there like statues, frozen in a memory neither of us knew how to handle. "Nick," she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper, and I nodded, swallowing hard, trying to find the words I'd rehearsed 1,000 times. "Yeah, it's me," I said. I found the letters, from my mom's place, and the photos. I know I've got no right to be here, but I had to see you, I had to see him." She stared at me, and I could see it all happening in her eyes, confusion, anger, heartbreak, and something else I couldn't quite name, and then she shook her head slowly, like she was waking up from a dream she never wanted to remember. "You don't get to just show up now, Nick," she said, her voice trembling, "not after all this time." "I know," I whispered, "but I had to try." She didn't invite me in, she didn't even step aside to make space on the porch, she just stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp, and I realized this wasn't going to be some emotional reunion, there wouldn't be tears and hugs and soft music playing in the background. This was real life, and in real life, when you abandon the people who love you, they don't owe you anything when you come crawling back. I looked down at the porch steps, then back up at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't try to charm my way through the silence, I just stood there and let her stare, let her weigh every single choice I had ever made and what it cost her, and eventually she sighed, like something inside her had cracked open just wide enough to let me speak. "I'm not here to cause problems," I said quietly, "I just needed to see him with my own eyes, to know he's real, to know I didn't dream him up in the middle of the night when the guilt got too heavy." She closed her eyes for a second, like my words physically hurt her, and when she opened them, there was a steel I didn't remember from before, a strength that had clearly grown in my absence. "His name is Mason," she said, her voice cool but controlled. "He's 10 years old, he loves science and builds these ridiculous little robots out of scrap parts, he's smart and stubborn and kind, and he doesn't know a damn thing about you, because I made the decision to protect him from that pain." I flinched, even though I knew I deserved every word, and more. "I get it," I said, "I don't expect to just walk in and be his dad. I know I lost that right the minute I walked out, but maybe I could. I don't know, just see him, from a distance even, just once, before I go." She looked like she was going to slam the door in my face, and honestly, I would have understood, but instead, she surprised me. She stepped outside, pulled the door almost shut behind her, and walked a few feet away from the porch, motioning for me to follow, so I did, like a lost kid chasing a chance he didn't deserve. We stood under the big maple tree in her front yard, the one that had started to turn orange with the change in season, and for a moment, she didn't say anything, just stared at the leaves like they might offer her an answer she couldn't find in me. "I waited for you," she said finally, her voice quiet, distant. "For the first few weeks, I thought maybe you just needed time, that you'd walk through the door and say you were scared, but ready, and I would have forgiven you, you know that. I would have forgiven everything." I couldn't speak, my throat was too tight, so I just nodded slowly, shame washing over me like cold water. "But then months passed, and I stopped making excuses for you," she continued, her voice shaking now. "I gave birth alone, Nick. I was in a hospital room surrounded by strangers, crying because the one person who was supposed to be there chose not to be, and when they handed me Mason, I looked at his face and realized I had to be enough for him, all by myself, and somehow I was." Tears stung the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I didn't think I had the right to cry in front of her, not after what I'd done. "I messed up," I whispered, "worse than I ever thought I was capable of, and I've lived with that every single day. Alyssa, I don't want to take anything from you, I want to fix something, anything, even if it's just telling him who I am." She turned to face me fully, and for the first time, I saw the pain behind her eyes soften, just slightly. "And what exactly would you tell him, Nick?" she asked. "That his father ran away before he was even born? That he chose freedom over family? What do you think that would do to him?" "I'd tell him the truth," I said slowly, carefully, "but I'd also tell him that I regret it more than anything in my life, that he's the one thing I never should have run from, and that I'm here now, not to wreck his world, but to take responsibility for mine." She shook her head, but I saw something in her expression flicker, not forgiveness, but maybe recognition, that I wasn't here for drama or revenge or some pathetic attempt to reclaim the past. I was just a broken man trying to make peace with the worst decision he ever made. Then, the front door creaked open, and we both turned, and there he was, Mason, standing in the doorway with a juice box in one hand and a book in the other, blinking at us like he hadn't meant to interrupt anything important, and time froze for me, completely and utterly froze. He looked just like her, but there were pieces of me too, the curve of his jaw, the way his eyebrows pinched when he squinted, the way he shifted his weight to his left side like I used to do without thinking, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't speak. "Mom," he called out, "is everything okay?" Alyssa turned to him, her voice softening. "Yeah, sweetie, everything's fine, go back inside, I'll be there in a minute." He hesitated, glanced at me, his eyes curious but not afraid, and then nodded and disappeared back into the house, leaving a silence in his wake that felt heavier than before. "That's him," I said, almost to myself, "that's my son." "No, Nick," she replied quietly, "he's my son, because I stayed, because I chose him, because I showed up every single day, and you didn't." I nodded, because she was right, and I had no argument to make, no defense left in me. "But," she added, and the word hung in the air like an unexpected thread of hope, "if you really mean what you say, if this isn't just guilt or nostalgia, then maybe there's a path forward, not as his dad, not yet, maybe not ever, but as someone who wants to know him, slowly, carefully, on his terms." Hope slammed into me so hard I had to grip the tree trunk just to stay standing. "Anything," I said, "I'll take whatever you're willing to give me." She nodded, still guarded, still unsure, but not completely closed off anymore. "I'll think about it, and I'll talk to Jason, my husband, because this affects all of us, and Mason comes first, always." I swallowed the jealousy that flared at hearing that name, knowing I had no right to feel it. "Of course," I whispered. "Thank you, Alyssa, I mean it." She didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't offer comfort. She just walked back toward the house with the same grace she'd always carried, and I stood there long after the door closed behind her, staring up at the orange leaves and wondering how much more of this storm I had the strength to walk through. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't running again. Not this time. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I just lay there in the motel bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow, hypnotic circles, letting every thought crash over me like waves I was too tired to swim through. I kept replaying her voice in my head, the way she said, "Maybe there's a path forward," and I clung to it like a lifeline, because it was the first sign of light I'd seen in over a decade. I kept thinking about Mason, about his face, his eyes, the way he'd looked at me like I was just another stranger, and in truth, that's exactly what I was, a stranger who happened to share some of his DNA, a man who had forfeited every right to call himself Dad the day he walked away from a scared, pregnant woman without so much as a backward glance. In the morning I got up early, shaved, dressed in clean clothes I didn't even remember packing, and I drove around the neighborhood slowly, like I was trying to memorize the place he called home, the route he probably took to school, the corners he might turn on his bike with a helmet too big for his head, and I hated myself for how much I'd missed. Hated that I didn't know what his laugh sounded like or what kind of cereal he liked or what story he begged for at bedtime. By noon I still hadn't heard from Alyssa, and I didn't expect to. I figured she needed time, space, maybe a conversation with her husband that I'd never get to hear, and I tried to be okay with that. I tried to stay patient, but patience doesn't come easy to a man drowning in regret. It was the next day, late afternoon, when I got the text, just one line, simple and terrifying, "Come by at 5. He wants to meet you." My hand started shaking as soon as I read it. I must have reread it 10 times, like I was sure it would disappear if I blinked too hard. I didn't know what she'd told him, didn't know what he expected or how much he understood, but none of it mattered. He wanted to meet me, and that alone nearly brought me to my knees. At 4:45 I was already parked a block away, rehearsing every possible scenario in my head, and by 4:58 I was standing on their porch again, heart pounding like it might burst through my ribs, and this time when the door opened, it wasn't Alyssa standing there. It was him. Mason. He looked up at me, eyes wide, nervous but curious, and for a second we just stared at each other, like two people trying to figure out who the other one really was, and then he spoke, his voice higher than I expected, but steady. "You're Nick, right?" I swallowed hard and nodded. Yeah, I'm Nick." He looked at me for a second longer, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "You can come in, but just for a little bit. Mom said we're ordering pizza." I laughed, a little too quickly, like the sound had surprised me, and stepped inside, my shoes feeling too big for the floor, like I didn't belong in this house with its family pictures and warm yellow light and the faint smell of laundry detergent and something sweet baking in the oven. Alyssa was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, and she gave me a small nod, just enough to let me know she was watching, and that if I screwed this up even slightly, I'd never get another chance. Mason led me into the living room, plopped down on the couch, and grabbed a Lego spaceship from the coffee table, holding it up proudly. "I built this from scratch," he said, "it's got working landing gear and everything." I crouched beside him, careful not to seem too eager, like a man approaching a wild animal he didn't want to scare off. "That's impressive," I said genuinely. "I used to love Legos when I was a kid, but mine always looked like a pile of broken bricks." He grinned, clearly proud, and started explaining the mechanics of how he'd built it, his hands moving quickly, his mind even faster, and for a moment I forgot how much pain had led to this moment. I just listened, truly listened, to the sound of my son's voice. We talked about spaceships and science experiments, about a class project he was working on and how his favorite planet was Jupiter because it's huge and kinda mysterious, and every time he spoke, I saw flashes of myself in him, not just in the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, but in how he got excited when someone actually paid attention. Alyssa brought in sodas and a bowl of pretzels, and sat in the corner quietly, like she wanted to let this moment happen without interrupting it, but also like she was ready to pull the plug the second it got too much, and I didn't blame her. After a while, Mason looked at me, more serious now, and asked, "So, are you like my dad or something?" I froze, the words caught in my throat, and Alyssa looked up sharply, her expression unreadable, but before I could say anything, she spoke gently, "Mason. Nick is the man I was with before I met your dad, Jason, and he's your biological father." Mason stared at me for a second, then back at her, then back at me. "So, that means you left, right? Before I was born." My chest tightened, but I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I did, and it was the worst mistake of my life." He was quiet for a long time, and I didn't rush him. I didn't try to fill the silence with apologies or excuses, I just waited, and eventually he asked, "Why did you leave?" I looked at Alyssa, and she gave me a slight nod, like she was letting me handle this, so I turned back to him and said the truth, the ugliest, hardest part of it. "Because I was scared," I said. "I didn't think I was good enough, or strong enough, and I thought I'd ruin everything, so I ran, but running didn't make me better, it just made everything worse." He didn't say anything right away, just nodded slowly, chewing on the corner of his lip, then quietly asked, "Are you gonna leave again?" And that question, that tiny, brutal question, almost broke me. "No," I said immediately, my voice shaking, "not ever again, not if you don't want me to, and even if you do, I'll still be here, just in case you ever change your mind." He nodded again, then picked up his Lego spaceship and said, "You wanna help me build another one?" And that was it. No tears, no dramatic hugs, just a boy handing me a pile of bricks and a small, trembling second chance. We sat there for another hour, building, and talking and laughing a little, and Alyssa stayed in the background, watching but not interfering, and when Jason came home, it was like a record scratch in my chest. I hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered what it would feel like to look another man in the eyes and know he was the one who had raised my son. But he didn't shout or glare or tell me to get out, he just gave me a quiet nod, shook my hand, and said, "Thanks for being honest with him." It was all surreal. And when I left that night, Mason said goodbye without looking up from his Lego set, like I was just another grown-up who came and went. But I knew I wasn't just another one anymore. I was someone he let in. Even if just for a moment. And I would spend the rest of my life earning that moment again. I drove back to the motel in a daze, like I'd been underwater the whole day and was only just coming up for air. Everything felt surreal, like I was living someone else's memories, not my own, but the feeling that lingered most, stronger than the anxiety, stronger even than the guilt, was something quieter, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Hope. Not the kind that bursts in fireworks, but the kind that creeps in through the cracks when you're finally still enough to hear it. It was in the way Mason asked if I'd help him build something, it was in Alyssa's silence, the silence that didn't push me out, and it was even in Jason's nod, that small, quiet gesture that somehow said more than words could. But that hope didn't erase the truth. I was still the guy who left. Still the coward who ran from the most important moment in his life and abandoned two people who had every right to hate him forever. The next few days passed in a strange blur. I didn't reach out to Alyssa, didn't want to push or seem desperate. I just waited, checked my phone 100 times a day, wandered around the city like a ghost retracing old steps, and each night I sat on the edge of my motel bed wondering if I'd ever be allowed back into a life I threw away so carelessly. And then, 3 days later, she texted again. "Mason wants to see you. Come tomorrow after school." I didn't know whether to cry or scream or fall to my knees. I just stared at the message, this little rectangle of words that held more grace than I deserved, and I answered simply, "I'll be there." The next afternoon, when I pulled up to the house, Mason was already outside, bouncing a basketball in the driveway, and when he saw me, he waved like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Wanna shoot some hoops?" He called out, like we'd been doing this for years instead of picking up from nothing. I got out of the car, trying not to show how nervous I was, and joined him, the ball cold and familiar in my hands, and we shot baskets for almost half an hour, barely talking, just existing together, and somehow that was enough. Eventually, we sat on the curb, sweat drying on our foreheads, the sun dipping low, casting everything in that warm golden light that makes everything feel softer than it really is. "Did you play basketball when you were a kid?" he asked, not looking at me, just watching a bug crawl across the sidewalk. "Yeah," I said, "wasn't great, but I liked it." "Mom says I'm gonna be tall," he said, grinning a little, "taller than Jason." I chuckled, "You probably will be." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Jason's a good dad. He takes me to games and builds stuff with me, and he never yells unless it's serious." I nodded. "I can tell, he seems like a good man." "He is," Mason said quickly, like he needed me to know it, like he needed to defend the only father he's ever known, and I respected that, admired it even. "You're lucky to have him," I said, my voice steady even though it hurt more than I wanted to admit, and I'd never want to take anything away from that. He looked at me then, really looked, "But you still want to be in my life?" I didn't hesitate. "Yeah. I do, if you'll let me." He nodded slowly, then whispered, "Okay." Just like that. "Okay." Like a door creaking open. That night, Alyssa asked me to stay for dinner. It wasn't a big gesture, nothing fancy, just take-out containers on the table and Mason talking with his mouth full and Jason asking him about school, and me, sitting there like an awkward guest at a table that used to be mine, or maybe could have been mine in some other timeline. At one point, Mason laughed at something and nudged my arm like he was letting me in on a joke, and Jason saw it, and he didn't flinch, he didn't pull away or tense up, he just smiled quietly and kept eating, and I realized something that hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. He wasn't my enemy. He wasn't the men who stole my life. He was the men who saved it. Because while I was out there punishing myself, trying to erase who I was, Jason was here, raising my son, loving Alyssa, keeping them safe, giving them everything I was too broken to provide. And for that, I owed him more than I could ever say. After dinner, Alyssa walked me to the door, the quiet tension between us still very much alive but softer now, like we were both trying to breathe in the same rhythm for the first time in years. "You're doing okay," she said quietly, crossing her arms like she was bracing herself. "Mason likes you, he's asking questions, good ones." "I don't want to confuse him," I said honestly, "I don't want to mess up what you and Jason have built." She looked at me for a long moment, then shook her head. "You didn't show up to destroy anything, Nick, you showed up because you want to rebuild something." I nodded slowly. "I do. I just don't know what it's supposed to look like yet." "Neither do I," she said, her voice softer than it had been in years, "but I think Mason deserves the chance to figure that out, and maybe we do too." That word, we, it hit me in the chest like a wave I wasn't expecting, because I hadn't heard her include me in anything in over a decade, and suddenly the air between us felt heavier, like it was holding something old and unfinished. "I'm not trying to win you back," I said quickly, not wanting her to misunderstand. "I know you've moved on, I know you're married and happy and—" "I didn't say I was happy," she cut in, her voice quiet but firm. "I said I moved on." That stopped me cold. She looked tired then, not angry, not bitter, just tired in that deep way that comes from holding too much for too long, and I realized that even with Jason, even with a good life, there was still something unresolved between us. "I should go," I said, stepping back, afraid of the feeling swirling too close to the surface. "Yeah," she said, but her voice wasn't certain. "I'll text you." As I drove away, my mind spun in 1,000 directions. I wasn't just trying to be a dad anymore, I was also confronting something I hadn't dared to imagine, that Alyssa might still care, that beneath the layers of time and resentment, there was still a heartbeat between us, something unfinished, something fragile. And yet I knew the danger too. Jason wasn't a villain, he was the man who'd been there when I hadn't, and Mason loved him, trusted him, so if anything between Alyssa and me resurfaced, it could shatter a foundation that had been holding their family together for years. Still, as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop replaying the way she said it. I didn't say I was happy. And for the first time since coming back, I didn't know who I was hoping to win back more. My son. Or the woman I'd once broken. And maybe still loved. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay there staring at the ceiling of the motel room while the hum of the old air conditioner filled the silence, my thoughts spinning so fast they made me feel physically dizzy, and every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. I didn't say I was happy. Those 5 words broke something open in me, like a secret I hadn't dared to hope for suddenly whispered back. I wasn't naive, I knew it didn't mean she still loved me, and it definitely didn't mean she was going to leave Jason or that there was some fairy tale ending waiting just around the corner, but it did mean something wasn't settled, and that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one lying awake at night wondering about the life we could have had. The next day, I didn't reach out. I figured I'd let her breathe, let Mason process everything without pushing too hard, but around 3 in the afternoon, I got a text that simply said, "He wants to go to the park. Meet us there." I didn't hesitate. The park was familiar, though it had changed. The swings were newer, the benches had been replaced, but the big oak tree on the far end, the one Alyssa and I had carved our initials into when we were stupid teenagers, was still there, still standing, still watching. Mason ran up to me as soon as I got there, a soccer ball tucked under one arm. His face lit up in a way that made something sharp twist in my chest. "Wanna play one-on-one?" he grinned, already kicking the ball down the field without waiting for an answer. I ran after him, laughing breathlessly, and for the next half hour, it was just us, no awkwardness, no heavy conversations, just sweat and laughter and the kind of joy I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. When we collapsed onto the grass, both out of breath and smiling, Alyssa walked over with 2 bottles of water and handed one to each of us. "He's been asking about you nonstop," she said, sitting down a few feet away, her eyes shaded by sunglasses but her tone unmistakably gentle. "Wants to know what your favorite movies are, what music you like, if you ever got into trouble as a kid." I chuckled. "You tell him I was practically a saint." She smirked. "I told him you once set off a fire alarm at school because you thought the janitor was hiding a cat in the utility closet." "Oh, come on," I laughed, "that was a noble cause." She shook her head, smiling despite herself, and for a moment, it was like we were back there again, 2 kids sitting in the grass, sharing secrets and dreams, before life tore everything apart. "Mason's asking because he's trying to fit you into his world," she said after a pause, "and I don't know how to help him do that yet, or if I should." "You don't have to do anything," I said gently, "just let me be there, let me show up, the rest, we'll figure out as we go." She nodded slowly, pulling her knees to her chest, her face unreadable, and then said, almost too quietly to hear, "Jason's noticing." I looked at her, heart suddenly pounding. "Noticing what?" "That things feel different," she said, not looking at me, "that I'm distracted, and it's not fair to him, Nick, it's not fair to any of us, because I made a choice a long time ago to move on, and I did, and then you showed up and now, everything feels uncertain again." "I didn't come here to tear anything down," I said quickly, "I swear, I didn't. I just wanted to see you both, to try and be a father, that's it." "But you still care about me," she said, finally meeting my eyes, "don't you?" There it was. The question neither of us had been brave enough to say out loud. "I never stopped," I said, my voice low, raw, even when I tried to, even when I hated myself for it. "I never stopped." She closed her eyes for a second, like she was steadying herself, then whispered, "I thought I'd stop too, but you being here, it's like trying to forget a melody and then hearing the first few notes again." We sat in silence, not touching, not even close enough to feel each other's warmth, and yet the tension between us was thick, unspoken, painful. "I'm married, Nick," she said eventually, like she was reminding both of us, "and Jason, he's good, and kind, and stable." "I know," I said, "and I respect that, I do. I'm not asking you to leave him, I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to know if there was still something between us, even if it's just regret." "It's not regret," she said softly, "it's unfinished." Later that week, I got a call from Jason. I was standing in line at a coffee shop when my phone buzzed, and when I saw his name, my stomach dropped. "Hey," I answered cautiously, stepping outside to take the call in private. "We need to talk," he said, not angry, not accusing, just calm, steady, controlled. "Okay," I said, "name the time and place." "Tomorrow," he said, 8 p.m. "My workshop." "Mason will be at a sleepover." I barely slept that night, knowing what was coming, knowing that sooner or later, this collision was inevitable. When I got there, he was already inside, wiping his hands on a rag, the smell of wood and oil thick in the air, and he didn't offer me a seat, just leaned against the workbench and looked at me like a man who had already prepared his words. "I've watched my wife cry 3 times in 10 years, he began, once when her mother died, once when Mason broke his arm, and once, last night, after you left the park." I said nothing, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, shame rising like bile in my throat. "She's confused," he continued, "and I don't blame her, because you were her first love, her first heartbreak, and now you're back and everything's stirred up again. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it more than he probably realized. I didn't come to cause problems. But you did, he interrupted, not because you meant to, but because you exist, and because part of her heart never stopped belonging to you. That hit hard. He sighed, rubbing a hand through his beard. I've raised Mason like he's my own. I've given Alyssa everything I could, and I never once resented what came before me, not until now. I finally found the courage to meet his gaze. I'm not trying to take them from you. I know, he said, but what happens if she starts wanting you back? What happens to everything we've built? I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm not walking away again, Jason, not this time. He nodded slowly, as if he expected that answer, then said something I didn't see coming. Then I guess we see who she chooses. When I left Jason's workshop that night, I felt like my chest had been hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and scooped out every ounce of certainty I'd managed to hold onto since coming back. He hadn't yelled, hadn't threatened me, he'd just looked me in the eye like a man who knew exactly what he stood to lose, and still stood there anyway, calm and unshaken. I should have respected him more than I already did. But all I could think about was Alyssa. How she must have cried after I left. How torn she must be now, between the life she'd built and the ghost of the life she once wanted. And maybe I was that ghost. Maybe I was the echo she thought she'd buried. But somehow, I was back. Real, breathing, standing in front of her again. And she didn't know what to do with that. Neither did I. The next few days passed slowly, every hour stretched thin by the weight of not knowing. I didn't text her, didn't call. I figured she needed space. Jason probably did too. But Mason didn't. That boy messaged me every morning. Little things, memes, jokes, pictures of the waffles he burned. Once he sent me a video of him singing off-key in the car and captioned it, "Mom says you used to sing worse." Confirm. It was like being stitched back into something, thread by thread. Painful, slow, but real. I was being given a place again, not by Alyssa, not yet, but by my son. And I don't think he even knew how much that saved me. On the fourth day, she texted. "Can we talk?" We met at the lake, the one just outside town, where the water always smelled like pine and childhood. She was already there when I arrived, standing by the edge with her hands shoved in her jacket pockets, her hair tied back in that same loose knot she used to wear when we were barely 20 and too young to understand what real consequences meant. "I told Jason about us," she said without looking at me. I walked up beside her, heart thudding. "What did you tell him?" "That I'm confused," she said, "that part of me still feels everything I used to feel, and that I don't know what that means, not yet." I looked out at the lake, the wind biting against my face. "He said I'd have to choose," she added quietly. And I told him I wasn't ready to do that, not until I figured out what this really is between us now, if it's just history whispering, or something more. "What did he say?" I asked, afraid of the answer. "He said he'd wait," she whispered, her voice catching, "because he loves me." The words hit like a brick to the chest. Of course he loved her. How could he not? And yet, standing there, I couldn't help but want to reach for her hand, to remind her of the life we'd almost had, to tell her that the love I'd carried all these years wasn't some fleeting memory, it was real. It had survived things that should have killed it. "Alyssa," I said, finally daring to meet her eyes, "if you asked me to leave right now, I would. I'd walk away, I'd let you live your life in peace. But if there's even the smallest part of you that wonders what we could still be, I need you to tell me. Because I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel when I look at you." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat down on the wooden bench facing the lake and motioned for me to join her. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever. Only the sound of the water and the wind filling the air. When I found out I was pregnant, she finally said, "I was terrified. Not just of being a mother, but of doing it alone. And when you left, I hated you. I hated you so much I thought it would eat me alive. But then Mason was born, and I held him, and he looked at me like I was his whole world. And I stopped hating you. Because if you hadn't left, maybe I wouldn't have had that. That moment, that purpose." My throat burned, my eyes stung. "I don't blame you for hating me," I said, "I hated me too. But now you're here," she continued, her voice soft but steady, "and everything I thought was settled suddenly isn't. Jason's been my rock for so long, but with you, it's like the floor keeps shifting beneath me. I know I don't deserve to ask, I said, but do you still love me? She looked down, her fingers playing with the zipper of her coat. Then, without looking at me, she whispered. I never stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. The kind that hangs between two people when something irreversible has just been said. Something that changes everything. And yet, she didn't move. She didn't reach for me, didn't lean in, didn't break the space between us. She just sat there, breathing, blinking away tears she probably didn't want me to see. I don't know what to do, she said finally. I love him, but not like this, not like I love you. But I have a life, Nick. I have a son who's happy and safe and doesn't need his world turned upside down. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words pressing down on every nerve in my body. I'm not asking you to blow up your life, I said gently. I just want you to know that I'm here, that I'm staying. For Mason, yes. But for you too. Even if you never choose me again. She turned to me then, eyes shining, and said something I'll never forget. I think part of me always hoped you'd come back, but I also hoped you wouldn't. I understood that in a way I couldn't explain. Because coming back meant facing everything. It meant feeling all the things we'd locked away for years. It meant decisions. Real ones. Ones that would hurt, no matter what we chose. We sat there until the sun began to sink below the trees, casting gold across the water. And when she stood up, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me one last time. Then walked away. And I sat there long after she was gone. Watching the ripples on the lake. Wondering how a single heart could love two people in such different ways. And still feel whole. But maybe that was the point. Maybe love was never about being whole. Maybe it was about the choice you made. Even when it broke you. A week passed after that conversation by the lake. A week where every hour felt like a suspended breath. I didn't press her, didn't message or show up. I just waited, not because I was patient, but because I was terrified of the answer. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest seized. Every time it didn't, I panicked more. Mason still messaged me, funny little videos, his doodles, questions about old cartoons from my time. It was like nothing had changed between us. But everything had. Because I wasn't just visiting his life anymore. I was hoping to stay. Then one night, it was Thursday, I remember because I hadn't slept since Monday, my phone rang. Alyssa. I picked up on the first ring, my voice caught in my throat. Hey. Can you come to the house? She asked, her voice steady but flat, unreadable. Yeah, I said quickly, of course. I drove over in silence, my palms sweating. I didn't know what I was walking into, a decision, a goodbye, a confession, or a war. I just knew it would change everything. When I pulled up, Jason's truck wasn't in the driveway. The porch light was on. Alyssa stood at the door like she'd been waiting. She didn't say anything as I stepped inside. The house was quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. I followed her to the living room where she sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He moved out this morning, she said, without looking at me. I felt a jolt in my chest. What? Jason, she said, he left. Took a suitcase and said he needed time, that I needed time. Her voice cracked then, just barely. He said he could see it in my eyes every time you were near, that I was somewhere else entirely. I sank into the armchair across from her, struggling to process it. He said I don't owe him anything, she added, that he'd rather leave than make me stay out of guilt. I wanted to hate Jason. Wanted to blame him for walking out. But how could I? When he had done what I never could, he left with grace. I didn't ask him to go, she said quietly, I didn't beg him to stay either. I nodded slowly, are you okay? She looked at me for the first time then, really looked, and I saw it. The grief, the guilt, the weight of trying to love two men who both loved her deeply. I don't know, she admitted, everything feels like it's breaking. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Alyssa. I never came back to ruin your life. I know, she whispered, but you didn't come back to watch it either. We sat in silence again, the kind that wraps around you when everything has already been said. And yet nothing has really been solved. I need to take things slow, she said finally, for me. For Mason. Of course, I said immediately, anything. I'm not ready to jump into anything, she continued, but I want to see what this is. If there's still something real here, something worth building from scratch. There is, I said, without hesitation. She smiled, not fully, just a twitch at the corners of her mouth, but it felt like sunlight. We talked a while longer. About Mason. About therapy. About how to tell him what had happened without making him feel like he was stuck in the middle of some romantic battlefield. She said she wanted to handle it gently, honestly, like adults. I offered to stay at a motel until she figured things out. She said that wasn't necessary, that Mason had already asked if I could stay for movie nights on the weekends. I told him you'd think about it, she said, giving me that same look she always used to give when she needed me to say yes before I even knew what the question was. I smiled and nodded. I'd love that. That weekend, I stayed for dinner. Mason made us tacos and told me all about his science project, a volcano that exploded too early and singed half the kitchen towel. Alyssa laughed, and for a moment, it felt like I had stepped back in time, not to fix the past, but to finally become part of something I'd missed. After he went to bed, Alyssa and I sat on the back porch. The stars were out, the air cool and soft. She leaned her head on my shoulder. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. Weeks turned into months, and nothing happened fast. She and Jason divorced quietly, without drama or bitterness. He still called Mason, still took him fishing and helped with his homework sometimes. He was a good man, even when it hurt. Alyssa and I started fresh. No big declarations, no timelines. Just morning coffees, shared laughs, and long walks with Mason in tow. And slowly, something new began to grow between us, not just a second chance, but a better version of us. Older, wiser, cracked in all the right places. One night, months later, Mason asked me, "Why'd you leave Mom when she was pregnant with me?" He wasn't angry, just curious. It took everything in me not to flinch. I looked him in the eye and told him the truth. Because I was scared, Mason. I was young, selfish, and stupid. And I thought running would hurt less than failing. But I was wrong. And I've spent every day since trying to be the kind of man who deserves the chance to make that right. He didn't say anything for a moment, then nodded slowly and whispered, "Okay. But you're here now." And that was it. That was everything. Now, sometimes I wake up early. Before Alyssa stirs, before Mason thunders down the stairs looking for cereal. I sit at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, and just listen. To the sound of the house breathing. To the laughter echoing down the hallway. To the life I almost missed. Not because I didn't love them. But because I didn't love myself enough back then to believe I could be good for them. But now I do. And that's made all the difference. I won't lie and say we're perfect. We argue, we stumble, we face the ghosts together. But we're building something real. Brick by brick, word by word, apology by apology. And I've learned that love isn't just a feeling. It's a decision you make every day. To stay. To try. To forgive. To grow. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe it'll be hard, maybe we'll break again. But now I know one thing for certain. I won't run this time. No matter what. Because when you finally come home, you don't leave again.